If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, you know they can be bossy, power-hungry, and downright nosy, but nothing could have prepared me for the insane ordeal my family went through when the HOA decided to send the cops after my teenage son, completely oblivious to who his unexpected visitors were and how the entire situation would blow up in their faces in the most humiliating way possible. And before I dive into the madness, let me remind you to subscribe if you love insane real-life entitled people stories, because this one spirals into so many twists you'll be shaking your head and laughing in disbelief. So here's what happened. My family lives in a suburban neighborhood where the HOA acts like they're running a military base, with rules about grass length, mailbox colors, how many cars can be in the driveway, even what kind of curtains you can hang. And though my wife and I have always rolled our eyes at the pettiness, we tried to play along to avoid trouble. But my teenage son, Jake, who had just turned 16, had other ideas, because he's one of those adventurous, bold kids who loves sports, survival training, and hanging out with his buddies in the garage, and he had been talking for months about some veterans he met through a family friend who had promised to visit him to share training tips and maybe inspire him about a military career. But little did we know that these veterans were not just any veterans. They were retired Navy SEALs who had served together. Tough men with stories etched into their scars, and when they finally pulled up in their black SUVs, wearing plain clothes but radiating an aura of authority and discipline, my son practically ran outside to greet them, bouncing with excitement, and the whole scene caught the attention of our ever-watchful HOA president, a woman named Carol who, I swear, has binoculars glued to her face all day, spying from behind her curtains as though catching a neighbor with a trash can out on the wrong day was her personal Olympic sport. So when she saw strange vehicles and tough-looking men gathering in our driveway, she decided this was some kind of illegal activity, because God forbid she mind her own business, and instead of asking us like normal human beings, she whipped out her phone and called the police, claiming, "Suspicious armed men were on our property," and within 15 minutes we had squad cars rolling up with sirens blaring, lights flashing, and officers jumping out with hands near their holsters, shouting commands. And that's when everything exploded into chaos, because my son was in the middle of learning some defensive stances in the yard, while one of the SEALs was demonstrating a maneuver, and from a distance, I guess it looked intense, but in reality, it was just harmless training, and suddenly cops were yelling, "Hands where we can see them." While Carol and a couple of her nosy HOA cronies stood across the street smirking like they'd just saved the neighborhood from terrorists, but the twist came fast, because the retired SEALs didn't panic. Instead, they calmly raised their hands, identified themselves with military precision, and one of them, who still carried his veteran ID and had contacts within law enforcement, immediately de-escalated the situation, and I will never forget the moment the lead officer's face drained of color when he realized exactly who these men were, because not only were they Navy SEALs, but one of them was actually still consulting for the Department of Defense on special projects, and suddenly the tone shifted from aggressive suspicion to apologetic respect, with cops stammering out apologies, lowering their weapons, and practically saluting, while Carol shrieked from the sidewalk that, "This is a residential neighborhood, not a war zone," as if she had any authority over national heroes, and one of the SEALs, a tall guy with a voice like gravel, turned to her and said, "Ma'am, the only war zone here is the one you've created in your imagination," which made a couple of the officers choke back laughter, and my son, who had been standing frozen with wide eyes, suddenly broke into the biggest grin of his life, realizing his heroes had just put the HOA in its place. But oh, it didn't end there, because Carol wasn't about to back down. She stormed over waving her little HOA handbook like it was the Constitution, shouting about rules against unregistered gatherings and threatening displays, and that's when the SEALs really had fun, because one of them pulled out his phone, dialed a contact, and within minutes a local news crew showed up, tipped off about veterans being harassed in their own community, and suddenly cameras were rolling, neighbors were gathering, and the HOA president's face went beet red as she tried to spin the story, but every word she said just made her look worse, especially when my son, still glowing with pride, told the reporters, "They were just teaching me discipline, respect, and self-defense," but I guess the HOA thought that was illegal, and the crowd actually applauded him, which infuriated Carol so much she stormed off shrieking about fines and lawsuits. But the cherry on top was still to come, because the SEALs, amused by the absurdity, decided to stay a little longer and give a free impromptu workshop for the neighborhood kids, teaching basic fitness and teamwork drills right on our lawn, and the same cops who had arrived with suspicion ended up helping out, laughing and joining the fun, while the HOA members sulked and realized they had lost every shred of credibility. And the next week at the HOA meeting, dozens of residents showed up demanding Carol's resignation for embarrassing the neighborhood on live TV, while petitions circulated to limit the HOA's power, and I sat there watching her face crumple as the community she thought she controlled turned against her, all because she couldn't mind her own business for once. And as for my son, he not only got the mentorship of a lifetime from those SEALs, but also a lesson in how arrogance and entitlement always backfire eventually, and in a way, the whole debacle brought the neighborhood closer together, because people started questioning why we let a handful of busybodies dictate every aspect of our lives. And the best part is, every time Carol passes our house now, my son gives her a cheeky salute, which makes her stomp off even faster. And the SEALs, they promised to come back whenever they're in town, and honestly, I think half the neighborhood kids are already signing up for boot camp workouts. So if you take one thing away from this story, it's that sometimes the people you underestimate end up teaching you the most unforgettable lessons, and sometimes the ones who think they have the most power, like entitled HOA presidents, get humbled in the most public, spectacular way possible. And trust me, I'll never forget the day cops came to shut down my teenage son's backyard training session only to discover they were standing face to face with real American heroes, leaving everyone speechless, embarrassed, and in awe. And that's the kind of poetic justice you just can't make up.